Welcome to episode 27 of Mindful Expat, a podcast for expats and other overseas adventurers in search of some guideposts for emotional well-being and resilience in their lives abroad. I'm your host, Dana Nelson, and I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest here on the podcast today. Today's guest is Dr. Carmen Roman. Dr. Roman is a licensed psychologist in the state of California. She's originally from Mexico and practiced as a psychologist there for a number of years before moving to the United States in 2007. Dr. Roman is bilingual in English and Spanish and offers bilingual and bicultural psychotherapy to her clients in the San Jose region of California where she lives. She also has a specialty in creative expression and art therapies, which is relevant to our discussion today, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her background in that area. Dr. Roman also has her own podcast called Emotions in Harmony, which is a bilingual podcast, again in English and Spanish, where she focuses on topics related to emotional well-being. So topics very relevant to things that we talk about here on this podcast as well. And I highly recommend that you check it out. She and I met through an online community of psychotherapists and other health and wellness professionals who've taken the leap into the world of podcasting. And it's been really wonderful to get to know her through that community. So Dr. Roman, I know that this just skims the surface of your background. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your own journey of moving abroad to the United States, as well as your journey as a psychotherapist working with other people in this intercultural space?
Well, hi. Nice to be here, Dana.
Thank you for the invite. It's wonderful to have you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, about me moving to the United States, I never expected, actually. I was not planning in my life to ever be in another country.
Yeah. So how did that come about?
Especially the United States, because I was socialist and I was against economy and all of this. So when I moved, it came because I fell in love with somebody, when an American citizen at that time.
Yeah.
And then I thought that I will come for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had my private practice. I was doing a group. I had a group practice in Mexico and teaching and everything. So I thought, I will go for a year. And then we both come back to Guadalajara.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it was not that way.
Yeah. We have very similar stories, actually. I didn't realize that. But yeah, isn't it funny how we sort of don't imagine these things and then life takes us in really dramatically different directions than we might have envisioned?
Definitely, yeah. And for me, it was a struggle because I was thinking that, in a year, I could persuade him to go back, or we can adjust somehow back and forth. But I never expect that I couldn't work as a psychologist. Of course, I didn't did any research about it or anything. I just assume I will plug in myself into the new country and we'll start looking for new clients, and that's it.
Yeah. So how was that adjustment? Yeah, that must have been really challenging.
It is very hard to know that, first of all, it was not the language. I didn't speak English at that moment.
Okay.
And second, it was not such thing like people waiting for me to do therapy, especially not in English. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I know too, in our field, it can be very complicated because different countries have different regulations for practicing psychotherapy. And the US is incredibly strict when it comes to regulations. So I imagine that must have been really challenging when you had all your training and your background beforehand, and then that wasn't probably immediately recognized in the United States.
Yes. Yeah. It really went into my bones of feeling like useless or nobody, or it was really bad. And then it was it's so hard. I was in the north part of the United States, where no Spanish was spoken at that time. So 2 years later, that relationship didn't work. So 2 years later, I did a real movement. I really moved for myself now, for loving myself now, to California, because I found the Ph.D. that I wanted to study. So it was at some point I needed to decide, do I want to sit and cry because I don't have the license here, or do I want to do a license in this country? And in 10 years from now, I can be still crying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
So I went and started from scratch and went to a master and PhD again and all the hours and everything.
Yeah.
So
that is so
it was fun.
courageous. So you had been practicing before, but then you had to go back and do the education all over again. That's amazing. Wow.
It was hard, but it was very useful for me to have now the two cultures.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I will do it again probably.
and it sounds like from what I understood from your website, it sounds like a lot of the people that you work with are also sort of living in this in between cultures sort of space. And I guess I'm curious. I mean, I can imagine maybe that kind of grew out of your own experience, and that maybe you can probably understand people's experiences who are living kind of in that space more than the average therapist. But I guess I'm curious how that came about for you, that you developed that specialty.
Yeah, actually, what is happening in California is a really huge need for Spanish-speaking therapies that are bicultural. It's not enough to speak the language. It's also needed to understand when they talk about their little towns in Mexico, mainly Mexicans.
Okay.
And I work with all kind of Spanish speakings from different countries, but when people talk about their food or their experiences or something, they find so helpful that I kind of understand their experience.
Yeah, it's so true that it is about so much more than language in terms of like how we speak about emotions and just understanding the nuance of, when people talk about a particular experience, understanding kind of where they're coming from. So it sounds like that's not there aren't a lot of people filling that need, and that you were able to step into that space and fill that need in a way that was really needed. Yeah.
Yes. So it has been really useful for my career. So I have only 1 year doing therapy in San Jose.
Okay.
And I start after 2-3 months. I had full schedule.
Oh wow! So there really was a need.
Yes, there really was a need.
Yeah.
And especially for high quality therapy, because it's now it became handy by many years in Mexico.
Okay.
Now it became really handy. So it was fun.
Yeah.
Now I have fun with it.
Well, and can you tell us also a little bit about your background in creative expression and art therapy too? Because it sounds like that you integrate that into your work around sort of culturally sensitive therapy, but that's also a specialty that you did in your training. So I'm curious about that and how that came about.
I was not naming it that much in Mexico. I was using the creative expression, but I was not studying as a specialty.
Okay.
Although I thought I was teaching for 5 years the creative expression in the bachelor degree.
Okay.
For psychologists, for business administrators, for marketing. That part became very handy for my personal life because for me, it was easy to dance or draw something or do cooking or knit something. So as an immigrant and having this process of adjustment to this country, I just use it without even realizing it was so helpful.
Yeah.
So when I went to the PhD and I have this specialization, I found that even other people talking about, other psychologists talking about the art in the process of immigration and all of this. So it was more intentional after that.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely want to get into that a little bit more. I know that as we get into our discussion, that's some of what we want to focus on. Before we go further, though, I do want to ask you, as I'm asking all of the guests here on the podcast, to share with us some sort of motivational or inspirational quote, perhaps something that has inspired you in your own journey of moving abroad and adapting to a new culture, or in your work. So I'm wondering if you have a quote that you'd like to share with us, and if you might let us know a little bit about the significance to you.
Yeah, I have a quote from Mark Twain.
Wonderful. Okay.
In 20 years, you will be more disappointed by the things you did not do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the boat lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover.
I love that. Oh, that's so
Yes.
good. And it kind of speaks to what you were saying before about your own journey too, of sort of
Yes.
making this decision. Like I could sit here and cry that I'm frustrated with my situation and that maybe you didn't quite say this, but I'm imagining like some aspects of that may have not felt totally fair. And then, or you could sort of figure out what can I do now to try to change my situation. And I mean, I don't know if there are probably many ways we can interpret that quote, but I hear it as being really relevant to what you had said before.
It has been really relevant, first of all, because in these 2 years, between me deciding to belong to this country, I sailed. I got the wonderful gift in life to sail for several months in Mexico.
Oh, wow.
I was living here. My address was here, but then I got the opportunity to go and sail the Sea of Cortez.
Oh, wow.
And it was really a metaphor for my life. It was a lesson because in sailing, you never know what is it. Once you leave the safe harbor, you never know what storms will come. And all you have is your creativity, and all you have is hope and faith in what you know about sailing. So I really think this applies to life. You will never have these experiences. I could never have the experiences of seeing the dolphins or sunsets or beautiful things if I stay in the safe harbor.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of about like taking risks and trusting that even though you don't know what's going to happen, that you'll be able to navigate that both literally and figuratively. That's a wonderful metaphor. I love that.
Yeah. So this is why I love that quote.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think it applies for everything in our lives.
Do you think that there are ways, I mean, I can imagine, but I'm wondering if you think that there are ways that might apply, especially when people are sort of taking the risk of going into a new country and adapting to a new culture, and that's a scary prospect of the unknown. Because it sounds like it had an important meaning to you when you were making that choice in your own sort of journey of deciding to stay in the U.S.
What I keep finding in the stories of my clients is that when we do the decision of leaving the country, is somehow because we already have or experience everything that we have in our land, in our little piece of life. Yeah. We are not at ease anymore. Otherwise, we will not do that. Yeah. Either because we fall in love with somebody or because we find another job or whatever. But it seems like when we are getting out of our mom, when we are being born, it feels like it's not a place for us anymore. So then we still call it the safe harbor. We still call it that is known. Yeah. But it's not true. At some point, our soul already wants it to travel, wants to go, wants to figure out something new. So it is important to recognize that because sometimes when we are lonely in a new country, we may jump into this place of, oh my God, why I did that? Or blah, blah, blah. But when you go back the last year or a week before or a month before, you realize it was needed.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah, and this helps us to feel more in control of who we are.
Sort of seeing that as a choice that like, yes, this is really difficult, the experiences we're having as we adapt, but also we made that choice for a reason. And that, maybe we can sort of think, oh, what if I shouldn't have come? But there was something that drove us to make that choice in the beginning. Yeah.
And I am telling you this because I have very often women, for example, especially women. Sometimes I work with women of victims of domestic violence.
Okay.
And they say, oh, I came to this country because I follow my husband or I was forced to follow my husband. Yeah. And sometimes when I tell them, what about if that husband was actually a very good excuse for you to have a new life? Yeah. And that brights their their face. It's like, oh, I didn't thought never about that way.
Yeah. Like maybe there are things about that relationship that were not good, but there was something that came out of it that opened a door for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are now in this new culture and they're trying to figure out, and probably they are lonely and getting divorced or whatever. But they have a wonderful excuse at that moment. So
yeah. That is an interesting way to reframe it. It sounds like it feels maybe empowering to them to think of it that way rather than I didn't have a choice and I just followed my husband and was forced to come. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you're starting to sort of touch on a few of the things that I want to ask you more about here. So that's a good segue. I guess, I understand, as we've talked about here, that a lot of your current work is with people who are either at various stages in the immigration process or they're kind of living in this space between cultures. And, on this podcast, we've already talked about some of the general kind of things that are really stressful and challenging for people who are living in a country or culture that's not their home country or culture. But I know that that can really also differ a lot from one experience to another. And I guess I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the particular stressors that you see in the people that you tend to work with. And I'm sure that, you see a lot of different people in different situations, but some of the kinds of stressors that you see in your work that may be kind of particular to Latino immigrants in California. And it sounds like a lot of the immigrants that you're working with are coming from Mexico, but maybe also other Spanish-speaking countries as well.
I have been studying for the last couple of years, not only the Mexicans, so the Latinos living in California, but I needed to study in general the Latinos and Mexicans all over the world because of the dissertation topic and all of this. No? So what I am learning is that for Latino communities, family is extremely important, and the group of friends is extremely important.
Yeah.
And moving to different cultures or different countries where it's not as important or is less frequent, the interaction with family members, that can be devastating for Latinos. And it seems like very simple, but sometimes the Latinos itself don't realize that. Sometimes they don't realize how much they need to be talking with their family or to have their family every Sunday, to have a big family dinner. So if we realize that, we start making family in the new places. We start making deep connections that are similar to a family.
And it sounds like maybe you're kind of touching on two things. One being far away from family is really hard. And then the other piece being in a culture that does not necessarily place the same value on that in a way that might make it harder to even acknowledge this is something that's really missing in my life right now. That those two things make it really challenging. And so maybe acknowledging that and prioritizing that, whether that be, spending more time with family or finding new ways to form family in the new location. It sounds like those are really important things that people can do to help themselves adapt.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really
recognizing
important.
that one. And also for the Latino population, sometimes they travel. One member of the family travels because they need to support the family.
Yeah.
They travel from third countries to first world countries.
Okay.
So what happened is they are with they are focused on I'm going to work and I'm going to send that money back and I'm going to support the family, and they miss the point that they also are human beings, not only earning income machine.
Yeah. I imagine that must make it really hard to actually be living their lives where they are if they're sort of kind of going back and forth between these two places as well.
Yes.
To sort of be present with family and also be present in the life where they're working. And that sounds so hard. Yeah.
It sounds so hard. And lately, in the last couple of years, is having a wave of middle class and high class Latinos immigrating to other countries just because of safety.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially in Mexico, the last couple of years has been a challenge for safety. And in El Salvador, in Honduras, they have already some other years doing it. Yeah. But we used to think that immigrants will be the low income who needs something. But sometimes not. Sometimes it's the middle class or high class who they have resources in their country, but they don't have safety.
Sure. Well, so it sounds like you're touching on stereotypes as well of the people in the U.S. When people move there, people have certain ideas about the immigrants that may not fit their experience.
May not fit, and they may not actually look like Mexicans. They are white skin color because they are from Spanish descent and all of this. So let's talk a little bit about not thinking about Latinos as people who is coming to take. Sometimes they really need a new safe place to live.
Well, and I know that I guess this sort of touches on one thing, because you had shared with me before our conversation here some information about your previous research that was really interesting, and we can get into that or not as it seems relevant. But I know that one thing that you touched on in some of what you sent me that seems so important is this experience of a lot of Latino immigrants in the United States of sort of feeling a bit dehumanized and really needing to be seen as people with all sorts of experiences and emotions and play and fun and creativity and family and all that. And it seems like you're sort of getting at that too, that people, when we feel like we're being reduced to a stereotype, that feels dehumanizing, and that feels really, really hard as we're trying to adapt to a new country. I guess I'm wondering if you could say more about that, maybe either from your experiences in your work or from your research or even from your own personal experiences, because it seems like such an important topic.
Yes, I did. I interviewed 53 participants undocumented, all adults, undocumented Mexican immigrants. And the last question that I did for them was, what do you want to tell to the community of psychologists in the United States? And it was such a beautiful set of answers. For example, somebody say, if you could come to my home and see how I live, you will learn that I am a human being. And or somebody else say, I go and take care of your children, and I am being the babysitter or the nanny or clean your house. And I want you to know that sometimes I need to abandon my own children to be the protecting your children. And that can be on and on for years. So mainly they were crying for, please see me who I am. Please see me that I have values. Please see me that I have family values, especially. So it was most of them were talking about, I want to be seen.
Well, and I think that this sort of also, I'm kind of jumping around here, but I guess I think it really touches on something too that I think is frequently, for different reasons, an aspect of the experience of many people who move to another country, where there's this dramatic shift in our identity. And some of that has to do with things like, for instance, it seems like you, for yourself, like when you came to the US, that there was a shift in what you could do professionally because of, the differences between the countries. And so in order to be able to work in your field, you had to do more education. And some people don't do that. And so they're not able to work in their chosen field. And that is a shift in identity. Sometimes it's that they can't express themselves in that language. And so suddenly they go from being a very outgoing, engaged person to feeling like they don't know how to connect with people as well. And I think sometimes one of the things that really impacts our sense of identity is that we feel like we're being seen as something very different by the people around us than the way we see ourselves. So if suddenly I feel like I'm being reduced to a stereotype or people are seeing me as just filling this role in their life rather than I'm a full human being with my own life, then that can really end up impacting our sense of identity too. And I guess, what I'm hoping is, I don't know quite how we're going to get there, but I feel like all of this seems really interconnected with your work on creativity and art. And I'm curious if you, what you think about that struggle with the shift in identity and sort of how you see creativity and art as playing a role in helping people navigate that.
If we try to understand that changing our culture and especially changing language, it will affect every aspect of our life. we will be more compassionate to ourselves. I know you have an episode about compassion and being the expat. We really need a lot of compassion to ourselves because we become like children. When we are learning the new language, we may pick up a lot of information by the non-verbal communication, but we still cannot communicate clearly our ideas. And sometimes we don't even know how to take the bus in the new culture, or
absolutely.
We don't know how to do basic stuff.
We feel incompetent.
Yes, and we are seen as incompetent. One of my colleagues came to me and say, I swear to you, I am not dumb. I swear to you, I know.
Yeah. But it's so true. And this is like, this really resonates with me here in France as well. Because when I first moved here, I didn't speak French. And there's also some aspect of just not knowing how things work here. And I think that there is this way that you can kind of know, okay, I know this stuff. And it's just other people don't realize that. But if that goes on long enough, it can start to feel like maybe I really am incompetent. And maybe I really, am not capable of doing things for myself. It can really take a toll on our self-confidence.
Yes. So the way I explain to my clients is you are yourself in your age, and probably you are another self the age of the years that you have in this country, in this new country. You probably are 1 or 2 or 3 year old, and you are learning like a 3-year-old. So sometimes one needs to talk to another. Yeah.
That's a great metaphor. Yeah. And maybe when we sort of think of ourselves as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, we can have more compassion for the things that we struggle with.
Yes.
Like we wouldn't expect a 3-year-old to be able to figure out the bus system or whatever.
No. And we will not expect a 3-year-old to know how to order in the supermarket.
No, exactly.
Or things like that.
Yeah.
But we are in this body. Yeah. And we look old. And other people just don't realize that. They just expect from us to know or to understand inside jokes, inside information. And I don't know, many things. Like at some point in my group of coworkers, they did a icebreaker, and they say one step out front if you went to Disneyland. And everybody but me. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what, I never been in Disneyland. And everybody was like, seriously?
Yeah, but people just take for granted that like everybody would know this thing, but no, not everybody would know this thing, or not everybody would have been there. It's true.
So yes, calling for self-compassion and calling for this kind of a patience, this kind of warm wishes for ourselves that we will be growing. Eventually, we will be bicultural, not at the beginning, So that is also helpful. And this is especially for Latinos, because in the Latino community, we are big in nonverbal communication. Probably Italians too.
Okay.
We talk loud with our hands and with our feet and with our body. And sometimes there are other cultures that they don't. So it seems totally inappropriate.
Okay.
So this is a stressor, a stress that comes when they are moving to different countries that are different way of learning or moving or talking.
Yeah. That there can be kind of misunderstandings around that.
Yeah. They talk loud, they move loud. So it can be as aggressive. It can be seen as aggressive when actually this is the way they do it.
Yeah.
This is another stressor.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, I'm wondering too, if, as I was sort of saying before, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about kind of the role that creativity or artistic expression could play in us beginning to see ourselves as competent in various ways when we're feeling that way, or that might just help us with self-compassion and patience and other kinds of things when we're struggling to adapt to a new culture.
Well, when we are creative, first of all, let's say that to be creative is just to be creative. It's not about doing art or being paid for it or being appreciated for it.
Yeah. So we can define it in many different ways.
Yes, but let's define it for today. Just the way that I can express myself with words, with my body, with crayons, with whatever I have. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we're creative or we allow ourselves to express creatively, we will be more connected to our soul. We will be more connected to who we are. We will have more self-confidence. Yeah. We will have a healthy expression of our unexpressed feelings. Let's put it that way. Yeah. We will be less sick because if we express more, our body doesn't need to hold that and convert it into
physical symptoms,
into physical symptoms. And we will be suffering less in our emotions. Because if I am angry and I start painting so hard or putting just dread or being, or I'm dancing and I am moving so hard, I have less need to be angry later on. Yeah. And it also will help me to keep focused in the present moment.
To be fully present. Yeah.
To be fully present.
So
that
important.
applies to everybody, whether you move to another country or not. But when you move to another country, it is so challenging to be in a new language that the expressive arts are the vehicle to express what you cannot do in words.
Yeah, that's really a good point. Yeah.
So it is a very good healing for the nonverbal communication.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a social aspect to it as well that we can be creative in ways that we're the only one who knows what we're doing. And then we can also be creative in ways that then we feel that other people appreciate, like they look at what we've done or or we cook a wonderful meal and they enjoy it and we see that they enjoyed it and that brings us some satisfaction. And so there's also sometimes that interpersonal component to creativity that I think can help us feel valued and understood. And I guess I'm curious if you agree with that. Yeah.
Yes, actually, especially in the Latino community, it's very important to be part of groups. So when I paint, at least I can say I am a painter, yeah. Or I do dance, I am a dancer. So that automatically put me in a set of group, in a identity. It helps me with my identity, yeah.
Yeah, it gives you.
It gives you a sense of who you are, no?
Yeah, it's a good point.
So when we say, okay, I play music, now I can go into the internet and see other players. Even though I am far away, even though I don't know anybody, I can even belong to a Facebook group that play music. Yeah. So defining what I like to do, it helps me to belong to other communities as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is important to define what is our art and to call ourselves that. If I am calling myself a dancer doesn't mean necessarily that I am a professional dancer or anything. I'm just a dancer. And if I get to hear from others, now I have this sense of belonging. And also it will give me that kind of credential to go to the church, to the local church and say I play music or, I like to read to other children or I like to meet together with other women. So it is an easier way to insert ourselves in a new community.
Yeah. As you were saying that, it made me think of, maybe this may be something you already said, but it just sort of solidified in my mind that maybe one way we could define creativity is really just when we create something. So it's not necessarily like we tend to think that creativity or artistic things are like painting or dance, which are beautiful and wonderful ways to be creative. But it could also be like, as you said, figuring out how to form a group where you read to children or where you create a business or where you, make a garden. There can be so many different ways to be creative. But when you feel like you are creating something, it gives you a sense of satisfaction and purpose. And as you said, that it also then is a way you can sort of insert yourself into communities. But I guess maybe somehow as you were talking, it sort of that struck me as like we need to sort of break out of the box of thinking of just art in the sense of what goes in a museum or what is performed in a traditional kind of like theater or something like that, and really think more about like when we are creating something, when we're having ideas and when we're getting excited about something, a project that we want to work on.
Let's think about a 3-year-old, since we are thinking about ourselves in different ages.
Yeah.
A 3-year-old will draw something, and it will not be worried if somebody will pay for it.
No, absolutely
they just
not.
draw it.
Yeah. For
And
the satisfaction and fun of it. Yeah.
yes, and they just throw whatever they feel there. That's it. If we are lucky, they are looking for the approval of the parents. That's it. Yeah. If we're lucky, because probably a 3-year-old will come and say, "This is what it is. This is your gift." Period. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we lose that as we became self-critical. As we grow up, because of course we internalize other people criticizing us. But if we can rescue that part of ourselves, since we are already rescuing so many 3-year-old things or 2-year-old things, that will be so much fun. Because I can come to my home, I can paint as long as I want, I can use so many canvases, and nobody needs to see it.
Yeah, it's just for you.
Like it. Unless I feel like it, or I can compose so many songs, so I can do whatever I want. And that helps me to be connected to myself.
Yeah. That seems like the most important sort of piece of, there's so many different ways that creating can be valuable, but like coming back to this point of feeling connected to yourself feels really important and central.
And I am coming back to that because when we move to another country or another place, we actually lost who we are. And the main thing is we lose the connection to ourselves, or we lose the connection to the divine. So people start not believing in whatever they believed before, in God or Goddess or the Virgin or whatever. They say they abandoned me. But when you do art and you lose the sense of time, that you become into that magical space of creation, then you discover your own divine.
I love that. Yeah. There is so much more about this topic that I would love to ask you about, but I am aware that we're running out of time here, so we're going to have to shift gears. I want to ask you, and you may have sort of touched on this a little bit already, but like I'm asking all guests here on the podcast, I would like to ask you if you could share with us some self-care tip that has helped you through your own journeys, and maybe something you do to take care of yourself either on a regular basis or during times when you find that things are particularly stressful, to give people some ideas of things they could incorporate into their own self-care routine.
If I am too stressed, I can just go to the kitchen, enjoy myself, put music or put one of the podcasts. Put something that I enjoy listening, or an audiobook or something, and throw everything out of the fridge and cook something out of what I have.
So maybe cooking is one of your forms of creativity.
Yeah. I love dancing. I love painting. I love everything, but cooking, definitely touching the ingredients. I really create something out of what is there. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
I don't look for a particular recipe. I just create combinations, and then I don't remember the recipe anymore if it tastes good.
So each time is kind of a new adventure.
It's kind of a new adventure. So cooking can be seen as an art, and it's an art that we can eat, actually.
Yeah. The experience, an art that we experience.
So it's an art. It's a way of transporting ourselves, and it's our way to nurture our soul and ourselves.
And to nourish ourselves both literally and figuratively as well. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a great tip. Okay. So then I'd like to ask you also, as I'm asking everybody here on the podcast, if you're aware of any kind of helpful resources that you'd like to share with our listeners, either things related to the topics that we've been discussing today or other kinds of resources that you think would be helpful for anybody who is sort of going through this process of adapting to a new culture, or other things related to sort of emotional well-being as well.
I am firm believer of mindfulness practices. And I have an app that I use.
Oh, great.
It's called Insight Timer.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. And I'll include a link to that in our show notes so people can look it up. But that's a great one.
The Insight Timer has a bunch of meditations and something that you can listen in English and Spanish and every other language probably, to help you to start a practice or to have a practice I already have a very established mindfulness practice. So I can just go back and listen to new things from other colleagues.
Great.
It's amazing app.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And finally, I'd like to give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about your work and your podcast and any other kinds of projects that you have going on that you think people might be able to benefit from that you want to share with us here.
Yes, I have my own podcast, as you mentioned at the beginning. I have the Emotions in Harmony. I am also starting the second season. This last week, I started the second season.
Nice.
So it's in English and Spanish. The topics don't repeat itself. Either I do it one or another. So it's targeted to bilingual, but also somebody who is only English speaker can listen only the English ones, or vice versa.
Yeah, so it would be relevant to anyone who speaks either English or Spanish or both.
Or both. Yeah.
That's great.
I'm having fun with it. I am interviewing colleagues, and it's just so wonderful information there.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And also, what I do is in Spanish, I have a Facebook Live. It started like a radio show, but it became just a Facebook Live.
Oh, cool.
So every Tuesday at 12, I go live and people contact. They come in and they participate, and we have just a chatting about a certain topic of psychology.
Oh, wow.
So and all the videos are there.
Okay. And how would people find that if they want to go look for that and participate?
Yeah, they can go to the website of the podcast, emotionsinharmony.com.
And I'll include that link so people can find it easily.
And you can include the link for the Facebook, because the Facebook is a little longer to pronounce.
Okay.
But if you look Carmen Roman or DRA, which is doctora or doctor. Yeah.
I'll make sure I get the link, and then people can just click on it.
It is
go straight there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's there.
That's great.
It's a great community. We have a community for Amigos in Harmony for the podcast. So we are doing something that it may benefit.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic resource. And I guess I wasn't aware that you did the Facebook Live, so I'm happy to know about that myself too. Great.
Yes, it is fun.
Well,
unfortunately, it's in Spanish only.
Okay. Well, but in terms of like the listeners to this podcast, I think that there are people who listen all around the world. So there may be a fair number of people who either are native Spanish speakers or speak Spanish, and they can tune in, and that's a wonderful resource for them.
And podcast goes to everywhere. But we have a good number of listeners for the podcast in France.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, somebody of my friends just shared, and then it's spraying there in France somewhere.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I will include, as I said, links to all of those resources so that people can find them easily, and information about how people can follow up with you if they're interested in learning more about the work that you do in San Jose. And I so appreciate your sharing your wisdom and your expertise here on the podcast. I think this is a really important topic, and I know we could have talked a lot more about it, but I think this has given people some interesting ideas of things that they can really start to incorporate into their own lives. So I really appreciate that.
Yes, my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Roman today. To make sure that you don't miss future episodes of Mindful Expat, you can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting app. For show notes from today's episode, including links to all of the helpful resources that Dr. Roman mentioned, go to mindfulexpat.com/episode 27. Now and always, I would love to hear from you. My goal is to make this podcast as relevant and helpful to you as possible, so please let me know if there are particular topics that you'd like for me to explore in future episodes, or if you find certain discussions particularly helpful. You can contact me through the Mindful Expat website at www.mindfulexpat.com, or by emailing me at Dana, that's DANA, at mindfulexpat.com. And if you haven't already signed up for the Mindful Expat newsletter, this is a great way to stay in touch. You can go to the website and click on the button that says newsletter, or go to www.mindfulexpat.com/newsletter, and you can sign up there to stay up to date on future episodes and get monthly emails from me with all the helpful resources mentioned in each episode. And if you do sign up for the newsletter, you'll also get a free MP3 audio download of a mindfulness exercise that I've recorded for you so that you can practice at home. So again, you can sign up from the website. There's a button there on the right-hand side that says newsletter. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mindful Expat. I'll see you next week. Please be aware that the information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a mental health professional, and that listening to or subscribing to the podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship. If you believe that you could benefit from counseling or psychotherapy, please visit the resources page of my website for more information.